Captain Jake Morrison had seen better days, and so had his ship. The rusty wrench looked like it had been assembled from spare parts found in a junkyard during a particularly optimistic garage sale, then kicked down a flight of stairs for good measure. Which, come to think of it, wasn't too far from the truth. Jake had bought her with his discharge pay after 20 years in the human defense fleet, back when he thought civilian life would be nice and quiet. He should have known better. "Come on, girl, just a few more jumps," Jake muttered, patting the console like it was a sick horse he was trying to coax into one last gallop. The ship responded with a mechanical wheeze that sounded distinctly unimpressed. I know. I keep promising to fix your hyperdrive coupling, but medical supplies don't pay what they used to." A wet nose nudged his elbow, and Jake looked down into the most perfect brown eyes in 3-star systems. Buster, his golden retriever, sat beside the pilot's chair, with that eternal canine optimism that suggested everything was going to be just fine, thank you very much. "At least someone around here has faith in me," Jake said, scratching behind Buster's ears. The dog's tail thumped against the floor with enough enthusiasm to rattle the loose deck plates. Buster wasn't just Jake's companion. Over the past 5 years of cargo runs, the golden retriever had somehow become the unofficial goodwill ambassador of the Outer Rim. There wasn't a space station from here to the Centauri belt where Buster didn't have fans. The Calaxian traders always brought him those weird purple treats that made his coat extra shiny. The crystalline Vorthak, who couldn't even eat organic matter, had commissioned a statue of him for their capital plaza. Even the notoriously grumpy Merchant Guild had voted him honorary mascot of peaceful commerce 3 years running. Jake figured it was because most alien species had never encountered anything quite like a golden retriever. Sure, they had pets, but none with Buster's particular combination of unconditional love, boundless enthusiasm, and an uncanny ability to make anyone feel better just by existing in their general vicinity. "Kepler Station, this is the Rusty Wrench requesting docking clearance," Jake said into his comm as the massive orbital platform filled his view screen. The station looked like someone had taken a spinning top and decorated it with Christmas lights, which was pretty much exactly what the human engineers had done when they built it. "Rusty Wrench, this is Kepler Control. We've got you on scope. Bay 12 is open and ready. And Jake?" The voice belonged to Controller's Officer Kim Park, who'd been working the station for as long as Jake had been making runs. "Tell Buster that Lieutenant Vexta has been asking about him. I think she's got more of those Rigelian chew toys." Jake grinned. Lieutenant Vexta was a 7-foot-tall insectoid security officer who could probably bench press a shuttle, but she turned into absolute mush around Buster. "I'll let him know. He's been a little down since we ran out of the last batch." As if he understood every word, Buster's ears perked up and he gave a happy bark that somehow managed to convey both excitement and gratitude. The galaxy, Jake reflected as he guided his ship into the docking bay, was a pretty good place to live. Sure, there were the usual tensions between species, trade disputes and the occasional border skirmish, but for the most part, everyone had figured out how to get along. Humans had carved out their niche as the friendly, slightly chaotic neighbors who threw great parties and could fix anything with enough coffee and creative cursing. It was peaceful, quiet, even. Jake should have known it wouldn't last. 2 hours out from Kepler Station, with Buster happily chewing on a new Rigelian toy that squeaked in 17 different frequencies, Jake's peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the kind of thing that made cargo haulers consider early retirement: an unscheduled encounter with the Valdorian Empire. The Valdorians were what happened when someone took all the worst parts of militaristic efficiency and combined them with the personality of a tax auditor having a particularly bad day. They'd been steadily expanding their territory for the past 50 years through a combination of overwhelming force and their signature move, which they called efficient conquest through intimidation. Most species found it easier to just pay the tribute and move on with their lives. Jake was not most species. "Unknown vessel, you will cease forward motion and prepare to be boarded," announced a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a garbage disposal. "This is Supreme Commander Zekthor of the Valdorian Empire. You are transporting materials through sovereign Valdorian space without proper authorization." Jake looked at his navigation display, which cheerfully informed him he was in international space, approximately 3 light-years from the nearest Valdorian outpost. Negative on that, Commander Gravel Voice. I'm in international space carrying medical supplies to the Proxima colony. You know, sick people, medicine, basic humanitarian stuff." "Your compliance is not a request, human. The Valdorian Empire has expanded its borders as of this morning. All traffic in this sector now requires proper tribute." Through his viewscreen, Jake could see the Valdorian dreadnought that had just dropped out of hyperspace. It was roughly the size of a city block and looked like someone had designed it specifically to give people nightmares. The ship bristled with enough weapons to sterilize a small moon, which was probably the point. "Listen, Commander," Jake said, trying to keep his voice reasonable. "I'm just a cargo hauler. I've got medical supplies that people are counting on. Can't we work something out? Maybe I pay a small fee and we all go about our day. The tribute for passage is the entirety of your cargo. Consider it a lesson in respecting Valdorian authority." Jake felt his jaw clench. The medical supplies in his hold were desperately needed antibiotics for a childhood disease outbreak on Proxima Colony. Without them, kids were going to die. "Yeah, that's not happening, pal. Find someone else to shake down." There was a long pause. Then Commander Zekthor said something that would echo through galactic history as one of the most catastrophically stupid sentences ever uttered by an intelligent being. "Perhaps you need motivation, human. Transport the animal to our ship. If the cargo is not transferred within 1 hour, the creature will be processed." Jake's blood went cold. "The what now?" "The furry quadruped. It will make adequate leverage for securing your compliance." Jake turned to look at Buster, who was still happily squeaking his new toy, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just become the center of what would soon be known as the shortest and most one-sided war in galactic history. "Commander," Jake said, and there was something in his voice that made the temperature in the cabin seem to drop by several degrees. "I want to make sure I understand this correctly. You're threatening my dog. The creature will be processed if you do not comply. This is standard Valdorian procedure." Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly calm, which anyone who had served with him in the defense fleet would have recognized as a very, very bad sign. "Commander Zektor, I need you to listen to me, very carefully. That dog has honorary citizenship in 14 star systems. He has his own diplomatic immunity. He's been declared a galactic treasure by the United Species Council. But more importantly, he's my best friend. And if you so much as ruffle his fur, I'm going to introduce you to something we humans like to call disproportionate response." Zektor's laugh sounded like a chainsaw hitting concrete. "Your threats are meaningless, primitive. Prepare for boarding." As the Valdorian transport ship detached from the dreadnought and headed for the Rusty Wrench, Jake reached over and scratched Buster behind the ears one more time. "Don't worry, boy," he said softly. "Daddy's about to remind the galaxy why you don't mess with a human's dog." 20 minutes later, after watching Valdorian soldiers march his best friend onto their transport at gunpoint, Jake activated his emergency beacon and opened a channel to Earth Defense Command. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to Admiral Lisa Rodriguez, known throughout the fleet as Hammer, for her tendency to solve problems through the creative application of overwhelming force. "Jake, what's wrong? You look like someone just told you the Cubs lost the World Series again." "Lisa, they took Buster." Admiral Rodriguez blinked. Then she leaned forward, her expression shifting from casual concern to the kind of cold fury typically reserved for people who cut in line at the DMV. "I'm sorry. Did you just say someone took Buster?" "The Valdoran Empire. Commander Zekthor. They're holding him hostage for my medical cargo." There was a long pause. Admiral Rodriguez closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, Jake could practically see the gears of the human defense fleet war machine beginning to turn. "Jake, I need you to transmit their exact coordinates, and I mean exact. We're talking down to the decimal point here." "Lisa, what are you planning?" "What am I planning?" Admiral Rodriguez stood up, and Jake could hear her already barking orders to someone off-screen. "I'm planning to explain to these Valdorian idiots why the phrase 'don't poke the bear' exists in 47 different galactic languages. They want to see what happens when you threaten a human's dog? Fine, let's show them." The next hour was like watching a peaceful suburban neighborhood transform into a military staging ground. Jake's emergency beacon didn't just reach Earth Defense Command. It reached every human ship, station, and outpost within 50 light-years. And apparently word traveled fast. The first to arrive was Captain Rex Bulldog Chen in his converted mining vessel Dirt Devil. Rex had served with Jake back in the day and had been hauling asteroid ore when he picked up the distress call. "Jake, buddy, I heard about Buster. I've got a full load of mining charges and a very bad attitude. Where do you need them?" Next came the cargo hauler New Texas, captained by Maria Santos, who'd apparently been carrying farm equipment to the outer colonies. The fact that her farm equipment included military-grade plasma cannons was just a happy coincidence. "Nobody messes with the galaxy's goodest boy," she announced over the comm. "Not on my watch." Then the real surprise arrived, a dozen ships from the Colonial Guard, the supposedly retired veterans who'd settled on frontier worlds to live quiet lives of farming and peaceful retirement. Their leader, Colonel Frank "Tank" Williams, opened a channel with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. "Well, well, Jake Morrison, heard you got yourself a problem. Frank, what are you guys doing out here? I thought you were all growing vegetables and complaining about your arthritis." "We were, but then someone threatened Buster, and well, you know how Martha feels about that dog. She's been knitting him sweaters for 3 years. She's not about to let some overgrown lizards turn him into space jerky." Meanwhile, every major news network in the galaxy was trying to figure out why humans were suddenly mobilizing what looked suspiciously like a fleet. The Galactic News Network's lead correspondent, a crystalline being named Fluxara, was broadcasting live from her studio on New Geneva. "This is unprecedented," she announced to her viewers. "Human civilian vessels are converging on the Kepler sector in response to what appears to be the kidnapping of a single domesticated animal. We're seeing cargo haulers, mining ships, even what looks like a converted cruise liner joining this impromptu fleet. Our xenopsychology experts are baffled by this response to what the Valdorian Empire clearly considers a minor diplomatic incident." On the bridge of the Valdorn dreadnought, Commander Zek Thor was having similar thoughts. His tactical officer, a nervous creature named Sub-Commander Veltar, approached his command chair with obvious reluctance. "Sir, we're detecting a significant buildup of human vassals approaching our position." Zek Thor didn't look up from his tactical display. "How many?" Sir, 43 and counting." 43 ships for one animal? These humans are even more irrational than our intelligence report suggested. Signal the fleet. We may need additional vessels to manage this many prisoners." Sub-Commander Veltar cleared his throat. "Sir, there's something else. We're intercepting human communications, and they keep referring to something called Operation Puppy Dog Eyes. Also, one of their ships just broadcast a message saying, and I quote, 'Nobody makes our golden boy sad and lives to tell about it.'" For the first time, Commander Zek Thor felt a small stirring of unease. "What is a puppy dog eyes, Sub-Commander?" "Unknown, sir, but based on human communication patterns, I believe we may have made an error in judgment." Back on the Rusty Wrench, Jake watched his improvised fleet assemble with a mixture of pride and terror. Admiral Rodriguez appeared on his screen again, this time wearing her full dress uniform, and the kind of smile that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Jake, we're 30 minutes out. How's our boy?" "They've got him on their flagship. Lisa, these people have no idea what they just walked into, do they?" "Not a clue. They think humans are the galaxy's comic relief. Loud, chaotic, but ultimately harmless. They're about to learn the difference between harmless and peaceful." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "Don't worry, Jake. We're bringing Buster home, and we're going to make sure the galaxy remembers why you don't mess with humanity's best friend." As the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, Jake couldn't help but smile. The Valdorians had made one critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed humans were rational. Supreme Commander Zek Thor stared at his tactical display with the growing realization that he may have miscalculated. What had started as a routine shakedown of a single cargo hauler had somehow escalated into a standoff with what his sensors were telling him was the largest human fleet assembled since the Rigel incident. "Sub-Commander Veltar, what is our tactical assessment?" Veltar consulted his datapad with the enthusiasm reading his own obituary. "Sir, we count 78 human vessels. 42 appear to be converted civilian craft, but our sensors are detecting some unusual modification." "Such as?" "Well, sir, that mining ship has somehow mounted what appears to be a military-grade particle accelerator to its forward hull. The cargo vessel New Texas is broadcasting a weapons signature that suggests it's carrying enough firepower to level a city. And that cruise liner, sir. That cruise liner appears to have been turned into a troop transport. We're detecting approximately 3,000 human life signs aboard." Zek Thor felt a familiar tightness in his chest. 3,000? For one animal? "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Admiral Rodriguez's face appeared on the main screen, and Zek Thor had to admit she looked appropriately intimidating for a military commander. What he didn't expect was the woman standing next to her, who appeared to be holding knitting needles and looked angrier than most people did when wielding actual weapons. "Commander Zek Thor, this is Admiral Rodriguez of the Human Defense Fleet. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Zek Thor drew himself up to his full, impressive height. "Admiral, you are in violation of Valdorian space. Withdraw your vessels immediately, or we will be forced to defend our territory. Our territory? Admiral Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Commander, you're in international space holding a diplomatic envoy hostage. That golden retriever has more legal standing in galactic court than your entire empire. The woman with the knitting needle stepped forward. You listen here, you overgrown gecko. That's my grandson's dog you've got, and I didn't knit him 17 sweaters just to watch you turn him into space rations. Zekthor blinked. Your grandson? Honorary grandson, Jake's voice cut in from another channel. Martha, you didn't have to come out here. Like hell I didn't. Nobody threatens my granddog and gets away with it. Frank, tell this lizard what happens when he messes with family. Another voice joined the channel, this one belonging to Colonel Williams. Commander, I suggest you return the dog. My wife gets cranky when people upset her knitting schedule, and trust me, you don't want to see Martha Rodriguez Williams cranky. Zektor was beginning to suspect he was missing some crucial cultural context. You mobilized an entire fleet for a single animal? Not just any animal, Admiral Rodriguez said. That dog has done more for galactic peace than most diplomats. He's personally prevented 3 trade wars just by being adorable. The Calaxian ambassador still asks about him in every diplomatic meeting. This is absurd. You cannot be serious about engaging in military action over a pet. Admiral Rodriguez's smile could have flash-frozen helium. Commander, let me explain something about human psychology. We're a species that once fought a war that lasted 4 years and killed 600,000 people, because we couldn't agree on whether other people should be considered property. We've gone to war over tea taxes, Archduke assassinations, and soccer games. You really think we're going to let you hurt our favorite dog? That's when Zekthor made his second critical error. He decided to call what he assumed was a human bluff. Very well. Prepare for battle. All ships attack formation. Let us show these humans the price of challenging Valdorian superiority. The Valdorian fleet, impressive by any measure, moved into position. 12 heavy cruisers, 36 frigates, and the flagship dreadnought arranged themselves in a classic battle formation that had served the Empire well for decades, their weapons powered up with the distinctive whine of Valdorian plasma cannons. Admiral Rodriguez sighed. Jake, you might want to close your eyes for this part. Marta, dear, would you like to do the honors? Martha Rodriguez Williams smiled with the kind of warmth typically reserved for bake sales and church socials. Attention, human fleet. Operation Puppy Dog Eyes is now active. Let's show these bullies what happens when you threaten the goodest boy in the galaxy. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next century as a textbook example of why you should never underestimate a species that considers hold my beer to be a valid tactical doctrine. The converted mining ship Dirt Devil opened fire first, and Zekthor watched in horror as his lead frigate simply ceased to exist. The mining charges that should have been used to break apart asteroids turned out to be remarkably effective against military hulls when fired from a particle accelerator designed to move small moons. The cargo ship New Texas revealed that its farming equipment included military surplus plasma cannons that had somehow been linked to the ship's main power grid. The resulting beam cut through 2 Valdorian cruisers like a hot knife through butter made of titanium and false confidence. But the real surprise was the cruise liner Peaceful Sunset. As Zekthor watched in fascination, the ship's hull peeled back like a flower blooming to reveal that it had been converted into a massive missile platform. 3,000 tourists had apparently spent their vacation installing enough ordnance to reduce a small planet to its component atoms. Sir, Subcommander Veltar said, his voice climbing several octaves, the humans appear to have been using civilian vessels as camouflage for military assets. How is that possible? Unknown, sir, but that cargo hauler just deployed what appears to be a squadron of fighter craft. And sir, those aren't military fighters. Our sensors indicate they're converted racing ships. Zekthor watched as a dozen sleek vessels peeled away from one of the human cargo ships, moving with the kind of precision that came from years of competitive racing and an intimate knowledge of exactly how much stress their engines could take before exploding. The pilots flew with the casual disregard for physics that marked them as either insane or human, which in this case amounted to the same thing. This is Blue Leader to all racing units, came a cheerful voice over the comm. Remember, folks, these aren't asteroids, so try not to scratch the paint. Winner buys drinks when we get Buster back. The converted racers tore through the Valdorian formation like they were running the Kessel Circuit, except instead of avoiding obstacles, they were creating them. Valdorian fighters, built for efficiency and intimidation, found themselves outmaneuvered by humans who considered impossible odds to be a starting point for negotiation. Sir, We've lost 60% of our fleet. How long has this engagement been active? 12 minutes, sir. Zekthor stared at his tactical display, watching decades of Valdorian military supremacy evaporate like morning dew on a very hot, very violent morning. Subcommander, send a message to the human fleet. We wish to discuss terms. Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the homeworld. The face that appeared on Zekthor's secondary screen belonged to High Command Admiral Kexavar, and he did not look pleased. Zekthor, what is your status? We're detecting massive fleet movements throughout human space. Sir, we may have encountered a slight tactical complication. Define slight. Zekthor looked around his bridge, which was currently experiencing what his damage control teams were optimistically calling aggressive ventilation. We took a human's dog hostage, sir. The silence that followed lasted approximately 7 seconds, which was just enough time for Admiral Kexvar to run through all 5 stages of grief simultaneously. You did what? We took a human's dog hostage, sir. Admiral Kexvar's expression went through several stages of disbelief before settling on pure, unadulterated panic. Zekthor, please tell me you're not talking about the dog, the one with the diplomatic immunity, the one that has its own entry in the Galactic Species Protection Registry. I believe so, sir. The dog that single-handedly prevented the Calaxian trade war by being photographed with both ambassadors? Possibly, sir. The same dog that the crystalline Vorthak declared a living treasure of universal friendship and built a statue to honor? Zekthor looked at his tactical display, where the remaining 18% of his fleet was currently being used for target practice by what appeared to be a group of human teenagers in souped-up racing ships. That would be the one, sir. Zekthor, you magnificent idiot. You've just declared war on the one species in the galaxy that considers mutually assured destruction a reasonable response to someone cutting in line at their coffee shops. While Admiral Kexvar was busy having what psychologists would later classify as a career-ending panic attack, Jake Morrison was strapping on his old Defense Fleet combat armor and preparing to do something that would either get him killed or promoted to galactic legend. Jake, what are you doing? Admiral Rodriguez's voice crackled through his comm as he checked his weapons loadout. I'm going to get my dog back. We can negotiate his release. The Valdorians are clearly ready to surrender. Jake slammed a fresh power cell into his plasma rifle, with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. Lisa, they made Buster sad. I could see it in his eyes when they dragged him away. You know what happens when someone makes Buster sad. There was a long pause. Admiral Rodriguez had served with Jake long enough to know that when he used that particular tone of voice, arguing was pointless. Fine, but you're not going alone. Rex, Maria, Frank, you're with him, and for the love of all that's holy, try to leave some of them alive for questioning. The boarding action began with Jake's team launching from the Rusty Wrench in a modified cargo pod that had been hastily equipped with breaching charges and what Colonel Williams optimistically called aggressive entry capabilities. The Valdorian Dreadnought's point defense systems, designed to stop missiles and fighters, proved remarkably ineffective against a cargo container full of highly motivated humans with power tools and anger management issues. Breach in 30 seconds, announced Rex Chen, who had somehow acquired a military-grade cutting torch and was using it to create what could generously be called a doorway in the Valdorian hull. Remember, folks, Jake said as he checked his rifle one more time, we're here for Buster. Everything else is just obstacle removal. The boarding pod punched through the Dreadnought's hull with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, and Jake's team poured into the ship's corridor with the focused intensity of parents whose child was missing at a shopping mall. The first group of Valdorian soldiers they encountered made the mistake of raising their weapons. Jake's response was swift, professional, and utterly without mercy. His plasma rifle spoke 3 times, and 3 Valdorians discovered that human military training emphasized efficiency over warning shots. Corridor clear, Jake announced. Maria, you're on point. Frank, watch R6. Rex, find me a way to their command deck. What followed was 15 minutes of what military historians would politely term aggressive corridor negotiation. The Valdorian crew, trained for ship-to-ship combat and planetary bombardment, found themselves woefully unprepared for close-quarters battle with humans, who had learned their trade in the brutal urban combat of the Outer Rim conflicts. Jake moved through the ship like a force of nature with a very specific agenda. Every Valdorian who stood between him and Buster learned the hard way that humans didn't just fight to win. They fought with the kind of personal investment that turned tactics into vendetta. Jake! Colonel Williams called out as they breached another checkpoint. You might want to see this. They'd reached the ship's detention level, and through the transparent aluminum of the holding cell, Jake could see something that made his heart skip a beat. Buster was lying in the corner of the cell, looking smaller and more dejected than Jake had ever seen him. But what really caught Jake's attention were the 3 Valdorian guards who were sitting on the floor outside the cell, looking equally dejected. "What's going on here?" Jake demanded, his rifle trained on the guards. The lead Valdorian, a young soldier named Krixta, looked up with what could only be described as puppy dog eyes. "The creature is sad, human. We have tried everything, food, water, even entertainment broadcasts, but it just lies there, looking at us with those eyes." Jake looked at Buster, who had lifted his head at the sound of familiar voices, but still looked utterly heartbroken. "Yeah, that's what golden retrievers do when they're separated from their family. They pine." "It is the most heartbreaking thing I have ever witnessed," another guard said. "I have requested 3 times to be reassigned to different duties, but my superiors refuse. They say guarding the creature is my responsibility." "How long have you been here?" 4 hours. I have not been able to eat. Every time I look at the creature's sad eyes, my digestive system rebels. I think I may be developing an emotional attachment to your animal." Jake lowered his rifle slightly. "Yeah, that's what Buster does to people. He's got this way of making you care about him, whether you want to or not." At the sound of Jake's voice, Buster's tail gave a tentative wag, and his ears perked up slightly. The effect on the Valdorian guards was immediate and devastating. "Oh no," Krixta whispered. "It's showing signs of happiness. That somehow makes this worse. How do you live with this emotional manipulation?" "Practice," Jake said, moving to the cell controls. "And lots of dog treats." As Jake opened the cell, Buster launched himself into his human's arms with the kind of joy that could power a small space station. The reunion was everything you'd expect from a dog who'd been separated from his favorite person, complete with tail wagging, face licking, and the kind of happy whining that suggested Buster had quite a lot to say about his recent adventure. "Hey there, boy," Jake said, scratching behind Buster's ears. "Did they treat you okay? Did you miss me?" "Of course you missed me. I missed you too." The Valdorian guards watched this reunion with the fascination of anthropologists observing a previously unknown cultural ritual. "The creature appears to have bonded with you on a level that transcends simple ownership," Krixta observed. "This explains the extreme military response." "Buddy," Jake said, standing up with Buster in his arms, "you have no idea." That's when the ship's intercom crackled to life with Commander Zekthor's voice. "Attention boarding party, I wish to negotiate the return of your animal in exchange for safe passage from this sector." Jake keyed his comm unit. "Commander, this is Jake Morrison. I've already got my dog back thanks to your guards here who seem to have developed a conscience, but we still have some business to discuss." "What manner of business?" Jake's smile was the kind that made seasoned combat veterans check their life insurance policies. The kind where you learn why you don't threaten a human's family. "Boys, let's go have a conversation with the man in charge. Buster, you want to come meet the guy who thought kidnapping you was a good idea?" Buster barked once, a sound that somehow managed to convey both forgiveness and the suggestion that someone owed him a very large dog treat. As Jake's team made their way toward the command deck, the Valdorian guards fell in behind them, apparently having decided that protecting Buster was now their primary mission in life. "This is highly irregular," Krixta said. "We are technically prisoners of war." "Son," Colonel Williams replied, "after what you just went through watching that dog be sad, I think you've earned the right to see how this story ends." 10 minutes later, the doors to the command deck opened, and Commander Zekthor found himself face to face with the human who had just single-handedly destroyed everything he thought he knew about military strategy, interspecies relations, and the tactical value of threatening someone's pet. Commander Zekthor had imagined this moment would involve dramatic speeches about Valdorian superiority, threats of retaliation, and perhaps some dignified military posturing before his inevitable capture. What he hadn't expected was to find himself staring at a golden retriever who was sitting at perfect attention, tail wagging, looking absolutely delighted to meet new people despite having been held hostage by them an hour earlier. "Commander Zekthor," Jake said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that suggested he was operating on about 3 hours of sleep and pure righteous fury. "I'd like you to meet Buster. Buster, this is the gentleman who thought kidnapping you was a sound military strategy." Buster, being a golden retriever and therefore constitutionally incapable of holding grudges, immediately trotted over to Zekthor and sat down expectantly, clearly hoping for pets. The commander, a 7-foot-tall apex predator from a warrior culture, found himself completely unprepared for this development. "With me. It wishes to interact with me?" Out he was saying hello. Jake explained. That's what golden retrievers do. They assume everyone they meet is a potential friend who just hasn't given them treats yet. Zekthor looked down at Buster, who had now begun the classic golden retriever technique of tilting his head slightly and making his eyes impossibly large and soulful. The effect was immediate and catastrophic to the commander's remaining dignity. By the 7 moons of Valdor, Zekthor whispered, how do you resist this creature's psychological warfare? You don't, Colonel Williams said helpfully. You just accept that you're going to spoil him and move on with your life. It's easier that way. Sub-Commander Veltar, who had been watching this exchange with growing fascination, leaned over to his superior. Sir, should I be taking notes? This seems like important cultural intelligence. Before Zekthor could answer, Admiral Rodriguez's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. Jake, we've just received word from Valdorian High Command. They're requesting immediate ceasefire and formal negotiations. Apparently, their entire fleet is standing down. Jake keyed his comm unit. All of them? Every ship. Turns out when you destroy 70% of someone's military force in 15 minutes over a dog, it sends a pretty clear message about your priorities and capabilities. The galactic news networks are having a field day with this. On cue, the command deck's main screen activated to show a live broadcast from the Galactic News Network. Fluxara, the crystalline correspondent, was standing in front of a tactical display that showed the complete devastation of the Valdorian fleet. This is being called the shortest war in galactic history, she announced. The conflict, which began when Valdorian forces took a golden retriever hostage, lasted approximately 47 minutes, from declaration to ceasefire. Military analysts are struggling to explain how a species known primarily for their peaceful cargo operations and enthusiastic party hosting managed to deploy what appears to be one of the most effective asymmetric warfare campaigns ever recorded. The screen cut to an interview with Dr. Calix Vondar, the galaxy's leading expert on human psychology. The humans have demonstrated something that many species have suspected, but never confirmed, the elderly academic explained. Their reputation as a peaceful, somewhat chaotic species is not due to lack of military capability, but rather remarkable restraint. When that restraint is removed, particularly when their emotional attachments are threatened, they become perhaps the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Jake muted the broadcast and turned back to Zekthor, who was now kneeling on the floor, having apparently succumbed to Buster's relentless charm offensive and was tentatively scratching behind the dog's ears. Commander, we need to talk about reparations. Zekthor looked up, his hands still occupied with proper ear-scratching technique. Name your terms, human. The Valdorian Empire accepts full responsibility for this incident. First, you're going to formally apologize to Buster, in writing, with your official seal. Acceptable. Second, you're going to establish a fund for interstellar animal welfare. I'm thinking 50 million galactic credits should cover it. Agreed. Third, and this is non-negotiable, you're going to send every ship captain in your fleet a memo explaining why threatening human pets is a really, really bad idea. I will personally compose and distribute the memo. What else? Jake paused, looking down at Buster, who was now lying on his back, apparently having convinced the Supreme Commander of the Valdorian Empire to give him belly rubs. Actually, I think that covers it. Oh, and you owe him dog treats, premium ones, for life. Sir, Sub-Commander Veltar interrupted, we're receiving priority communications from several other galactic powers. The Calaxian Trade Federation wishes to formally commend our restraint in not harming the creature. The Vorthak Crystal Collective is offering to mediate peace negotiations, and the Rigelian Commerce Guild is asking if they can buy exclusive rights to sell merchandise commemorating this incident. Merchandise. T-shirts, sir. They want to print T-shirts that say, I survived the Golden Retriever War. Jake couldn't help but laugh. You know what, Commander? I think this might work out better than anyone expected. Buster, what do you think? Ready to be a galactic peace ambassador? Buster responded by rolling over and offering his belly to Zekthor, who continued rubbing it with the dedication of someone who had discovered a new religion. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself back on Kepler Station, but things were decidedly different. For one thing, the Rusty Wrench now had a permanent escort of 12 different species ships, all volunteering to make sure that Jake and Buster's cargo runs went smoothly. The Valdorian Empire had assigned a full diplomatic cruiser to follow them around, officially for cultural exchange purposes, but Jake suspected it was really because their crew had become completely devoted to Buster's well-being. The dog himself seemed to take his new status as Galactic Ambassador of Universal Friendship in stride, which is to say he continued to be exactly the same golden retriever he'd always been, just with more people to meet and more treats to enjoy. Jake, Admiral Rodriguez said over the comm as he prepared for another supply run. You realize what you've done, right? Every pet owner in human space is now considered a potential military asset. The Galactic Defense Council is having to completely rewrite their threat assessment protocols. Jake looked over at Buster, who was wearing a new collar that bore the official seals of 14 different star systems and had built-in diplomatic immunity transponders. Lisa, I think that might not be a bad thing. Maybe now people will think twice before threatening anyone's family, regardless of species. And if they don't? Jake smiled as he watched Buster greet the docking bay crew, each of whom had come prepared with treats and toy offerings. Well then, they'll learn the same lesson the Valdorians did. Some things are worth fighting for, and the love between a human and their dog is pretty much at the top of that list. As the Rusty Wrench prepared to depart for another routine cargo run, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The galaxy was still the same place it had always been, full of different species trying to get along and occasionally failing. But now there was a new universal law that everyone understood, written not in legal documents, but in the smoking remains of the Valdorian fleet. You don't mess with a human's dog. And if you do, you better be prepared for the consequences, because humans will burn down the galaxy to protect the things they love. The Valdorians had learned that lesson the hard way, but they'd also discovered something else in the process. Sometimes the things worth fighting for are also the things worth protecting. And maybe, just maybe, a golden retriever's capacity for unconditional love was exactly what the galaxy needed. As they jumped to hyperspace, Buster settled into his usual spot beside Jake's pilot chair, tail thumping contentedly against the deck plates. He was, after all, still the same dog who just wanted belly rubs and the occasional treat. The fact that he'd accidentally started and ended a war in the same afternoon was really just a bonus. Ready for another adventure, boy? Jake asked. Buster wagged his tail and barked once, a sound that now carried the diplomatic weight of 14 star systems and the promise that wherever they went, peace would follow. After all, it's hard to stay angry when there's a golden retriever around asking for pets. And that, as it turned out, was exactly the kind of diplomacy the galaxy needed.